organizing and labeling program that Adobe makes that's really fantastic for a lot of creatives. And then there's the one that everyone's very familiar with, Adobe Photoshop. And while Lightroom isn't a direct replacement of Adobe Photoshop, it does replace part of Photoshop called Adobe Camera Raw, which is the way that Adobe can translate a camera raw file into a normal image that anyone can then edit and work with. So Adobe Lightroom then is a raw file editor. And that isn't to say that it can't edit JPEGs, but it can edit, it can edit pretty much any kind of image file, but it's really good for editing something called raw files. And then somewhat vexingly, Adobe does make two versions of Lightroom. So what we're going to be looking at today is something called Lightroom Classic, and it's often considered the better of the two programs. The other one is Lightroom Creative Cloud, which is something that it's pushing. Like, they really want everyone to do this Creative Cloud thing because it helps them sell their cloud service. But as far as I know, everyone kind of avoids it like the plague because it's everything you don't like about mobile apps as a desktop app. And it really is, it's a mobile app put onto the desktop, so it's not great. Although if you got one of those touchscreen laptops, it might be fun. All right, so anyway, let's hop into Adobe Lightroom. So when you first open it up, you want to get a little familiar with the navigation in it. So across the top will be basically how you access different parts of Lightroom. And the two that we'll be spending our time in today is Library and Develop. And just to touch on these other ones real quick. So Map is a very interesting thing for if you have your phone pictures uploaded on here. It'll have GPS data, and it will lay out everything based on that GPS data on a map for you. Also a little creepy. Adobe Book right here is a very primitive book layout. And to be blunt, if you have any other option for laying out a book, use it over the book version right here. Slideshow is what it sounds like. It's the equivalent to a PowerPoint or a PDF, or yeah, it's good for laying out PDFs or Keynote, whatever you're using to make your PowerPoints. It's just a quick PowerPoint version. Print is its printing dialog. It's laid out a little differently if you're familiar with other print dialogues in Adobe, but it's all hidden in there. And if you're looking just to print straight out of Lightroom, it's good. But if you're going to have to be doing a lot of color correcting, you'll skip Adobe Print. And then Web, I don't have a lot of experience with. My understanding is it's for generating websites for the Behance service that they have attached to a lot of their subscriptions. Like, it's a free website and website layout builder thing for photos straight out of Lightroom. Now, if you find yourself like me where you just don't use most of these because there's other programs that will do a lot of this better, you can hide all these. And so if you right click up in this bar, you can just hide book, you can hide slideshow, you can hide web. And I usually leave these four up. Map is just kind of fun and its creepiness, and print, very occasionally I will use print. So we're going to start in Library. And if you're familiar with Adobe Bridge, that's what Library is. And so Library is for sorting, labeling, organizing, and setting up your pictures for editing and exporting. It's also for where you bring your pictures into it. And so when you're in Library, you'll notice you have an import and export button down here. And so that's the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on import to bring in some pictures. So if you've downloaded those files, this is where you'll find wherever you have them downloaded to. I have them right here. Interestingly, you'll notice that they are a little out of order based on numbers. So it's got it sorted by capture time. And then there's actually another picture in this folder, as you guys probably have noticed, where it's another dog picture. And so it's automatically hiding pictures that have already been imported from that folder. And just a little check mark right here allows you to say, I want this one, or I don't want this one. You can also double click into it to see it larger, and then you can switch back to thumbnails down here for organization. And then if you want it ordered based on like file name, right down here where it says capture time, this is where you can organize it based on a couple of parameters. And this is going to be true in all of Library, except once we get out of import, this will be much more robust. Now, this is the thing that when I teach this in class, because I teach photography and a bunch of Adobe programs over at Iowa Western, the thing that often can trip up students and people that get this program for the very first time is that when you're importing something into Adobe Lightroom, you're not really importing it into Lightroom. What you're doing is you're telling Lightroom where these files are on your computer. So if you move the pictures after the fact, Adobe won't know where they are. And more importantly, if you delete the pictures outside of Lightroom, they're deleted. Lightroom doesn't keep a copy of the picture in it. And you can tell that right across the top right here. So in this case, since they're already on my computer, the only one I have available to me is something called add. So that's just to add it to my catalog for me to be able to edit. And again, all it's doing is looking at where it is. If you're using Lightroom to import stuff off of your phone or a memory card, that's where you'll use move, copy, or copy as DNG. And DNG is that is an open source RAW format for people that are very good in photography. RAW is a very preferable format. This is the open source version of it. Copy is the one that you'll generally use the most, and so it'll copy it from whatever source you tell it to, and then drop it to wherever you want. So like if we wanted to do copy for this, even though it's already on my computer, I'll have to tell it over here where I want it to go. In this case, since I already have it where I want it, I'll just click on add. So I'm just telling Lightroom where it's at. Over here, we have called file handling. This is if you want to do some edits during import. Generally, I skip this kind of stuff. Like if you have a preset that you like to use, let's say you've downloaded those Visco presets, you can automatically apply them right here at import. And then you can also start applying some keywords and metadata right here. So this is something that is also really hard to convince people to do right off the bat when they're starting with Lightroom or Adobe Bridge, is to use keywords. And so all keywords will be searchable words later for finding pictures. And so like right now, we'll only have 5 pictures in here, but you know, for me, I've been shooting since 2006 and I've got something like 800,000 pictures on my hard drive just for photography alone. So having good keywording makes it much easier for me to find these things. So like for this one, since I'm importing a batch and they're fairly disparate, you know, I would label this like a Lightroom workshop or a do space workshop, and it'll add these to all of them right now, which will be really nice. Then I can just click import, and that will bring them into Lightroom for editing and working with. So notice that the dog picture I had at the start is missing. So this is something else that can be very confusing for people when they first use this program, is that when they import in pictures, it'll only show the ones that you just imported. So over here on our left is where we're going to have all of our navigation for looking at where pictures are. So Navigator is pretty straightforward. This is for, you know, viewing a picture at different zooms. Fit, or I usually do just slightly smaller than full screen, is very useful. And then also when you're zoomed in all the way, you can click and drag on this to move around. So I'll go back to 1 to 3 because that's handy for me. Catalog, so this is where it's going to list all of your pictures. So right here I have my previous import, and that's those 5 I just brought in. Just so I had a placeholder image, I had the other dog picture in here right from the beginning. In order to see that, I have to click all photographs right here. All synced photographs, this is for if you're using Lightroom on your mobile device and you sync Lightroom Classic with Lightroom Mobile on your phone. Quick collection is for generating quick collections based on ratings in here. And then previous import is whatever pictures you just brought in last. So I'm going to click back on all photographs. You can be either in previous or all photographs depending on where you're at. Folders, so this is the only safe way to move pictures once you've brought them into Lightroom and still have Lightroom know where they are automatically. So if I wanted to move these pictures, I would have to move them in this setting right here. If I go onto my desktop and move them otherwise, I'll get a little exclamation mark over each one of these pictures saying that it's lost. But that's not the end of the world. You can just double click again on here because there'll be a question mark instead of a 6. And I can tell it where this folder went to, and it will re-find all those pictures once it finds that folder. So it's not the end of the world if you don't move stuff in here. Collections, just kind of like with your iPhone or whatever kind of device you have, and you like rate a song to 5 and it makes a playlist of your favorites. Smart Collections does the same thing. So you can have it find pictures based on the different ways that we can flag, label, or rate these pictures. It'll automatically drop them into here for us. And then very nice, anything that is missing a keyword, it'll also let me know that I need to go in and label. Publishing services is very neat. I'm not going to get into it today. It's something that you can read up on later if this would be good for your workflow. But a lot of professionals that are going to be publishing pictures to multiple locations, so let's say Facebook, Instagram, Flickr, they can set it up where you'll put in your account information here, and you can just one button click on each one of those to upload all of that onto whatever service you're using. And depending on how well this upload button is written, it'll even pull out data that we're going to add over here in a minute on the right to things for like Instagram tags and then image descriptions on Flickr. So this can be really quick and easy to get everything online if that needs to be a quick and easy part of your workflow. We're not going to get to it quite yet, but this is where the export buttons, this is how we'll get stuff back out of Lightroom. More on that at the end of this webinar. All right, so we talked about Navigator, we talked about this. Now let's talk about these ones. So thumbnail view, full view, comparative view, multi-image view, and then face detector. We'll go through and find all the faces for you. It's kind of terrifying how well this one works. Similarly, when I start going through and organizing these based on rating, so I can right click or I can click, down here to label some of these 5-star, or let's say I label this one 3-star and label this one 1-star. And with just 6 pictures, it doesn't make that much sense. But when you import 300-400 pictures at a time, you can go through and label the ones that you want to keep. And then where it says sort right here, you can start sorting based on those markups. Similarly, you can also label them colors. And these are all hotkeys on your keyboard. So like green is 8, 9 is blue, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the different stars. And then you can also flag it. So you can set flag to flagged, and that will mark it as something picked, like right up there. And these, again, this is just so it's easy for you to find and work with these images once you have a bunch of them in there. So I'm just going to hit 0 to zero that out, 0, 0, 0. So they're not labeled specially. And then I'll turn off that color rating. Seems a little goofy with just 6 again, but very, very handy later once you've got a lot of pictures. And so instead of sorting by rating, I'm going to go back down to file name so they're in the order that I want to kind of poke at these guys. Any questions so far as we're moving along? I can also change the size of my thumbnails with the slider. Hopefully that's fairly clear. And then I can select more than one at a time by holding down the Shift key and then clicking in a row. And then I can hold down the Command or the Control key on a Windows computer to toggle selection on and off. So later when I want to export, that's going to be fairly important for getting these out. All right, one last area that we're going to talk about in Library before we get to editing is the right side of the screen. Here we have our histogram. If you're familiar with photography, you should be fairly familiar with the histogram. It's your distribution of tones in an image. So like you can see this big white spike right here. It'll be the big white spike over here in the picture. We've got, this is going to be that background. This would be her dress right there. It's just how your tones are distributed. And then some basic camera information right here. So let's say we're zoomed in on this and it looked blurry. I could come over and look at my shutter speed to see if it, I was just hand holding something I really shouldn't have been hand holding. Keywording. So this is where I can put in keywords. So like I can type in, so like for this one, this would be, I would add wedding and bride and so on. Wedding, bride, and I would go ahead and put all these keywords in there. However, like if there's a keywords that I used a lot, they would start popping up here so I can just start clicking on them rather than having to type them in. And then even better, I have something called a keyword list. So let's say that I do shoot a lot of weddings. I could set up keyword lists based on those weddings that I can set up keyword lists based on everything that I use. So let's say I would do, ones for brides, grooms, and then weddings in general. I could just click onto it and it'll add all of those to this picture. And then later I can go ahead and search by these keywords to find pictures that are labeled that way. So, and then again, some of those publishing services can pull some of that information out depending on how well it's written. Metadata is going to contain the EXIF data from your camera. So it'll say like all the information about your camera, when it was taken, what it was taken with. And then if you have your copyright information put into your camera, it'll display it as well. And then very importantly, it does let you edit the rest of that metadata. So like here's the EXIF, which you can't edit. Sad times for people that want to fake it. My photo students sometimes want to fake it because I make them take new pictures and that's how I check. But I can come down here and I can start putting in copyright information. So like here, it's already embedded in underneath artist. But if I hadn't been doing that, or I wanted to give more information down here, like my email, this is where I would put that information in there. And people who work in the graphic design industry and similar jobs will know to check the metadata to see if this is here, if they find an orphaned image on the internet, and it can earn you money. So like I've literally gotten a couple of licensings for photographs because I put in my contact information in this part of the program. So because they could find me through metadata, I got money. So like you can't really complain about that. And then comments, if you want to put any descriptions down here, you can also add comments. So let's say you're doing family photos, you can list everyone that's in the photo. All right, so let's get over to develop. So right now we were in library, which was only for organizing. And then something that's a little irritating about when we get into develop is this ability to sort is going to go away for, I don't know what reason, but that's what Adobe does. So I'm going to go into develop, and now I'm in the part of the program that's for editing. Now, when I say editing, it's a little misleading. So when Adobe Lightroom is looking at where a picture is, it's showing you a preview of that picture right now. And then when I start applying edits to that picture, it's previewing what those edits are going to look like. And it's never going to change the original file. Lightroom will never change the original file. It doesn't matter if you're in RAW, JPEG, TIFF, PDF, it's never going to change the original file. When you're looking at an edit on your computer in Lightroom, until you export it, you don't actually have a real copy of that edit. And when we export, that's literally what's happening is we're copying the image, applying edits to that copy, and then putting that copy somewhere on your computer. Very important distinction. So it's non-destructive editing. Your original is always safe, assuming you don't delete it. Navigator up here stays the same. Presets is exactly what it sounds like. So this is where like you have those Visco presets where people are like, I want my fake film emulation. That's where it would be in here. And it's fairly easy to add some in. So like if we click on this plus sign right here, we can go to import presets. And there's a preset in that folder I gave out at the start of the seminar called Lightroom Preset, Rizzle Dizzle. You click on import, and it will now be down here underneath user presets. Like I've got a couple of my own right here for I've calibrated some of these cameras a while back. And then, you know, the crazy Rizzle Dizzle. And it previews it by just mousing over it, which is nice. So, you know, colorimetric for my Canon or my Fuji saturation or Rizzle Dizzle. And notice as I click through these, and then later when I start moving any of these sliders around, something right here starts happening. I get a series of lines and each line represents a change that I made to the picture. And so this is history. So at any point, I can always click back to any other time backwards in this history. There's one big caveat with that, which is the second I make a new edit, these future edits right here are going to go away. So if I bring my exposure back up, I lost all those future ones. But I can always go back to import and get back to my very original picture. So let's say I had done a bunch of edits and I had a picture version that I liked, but I also wanted to try this in black and white. This is where I'm going to use snapshots. So I'll click the little plus and I'll say, I don't know, color edit and click OK. And then I can go ahead and, you know, go through and do, you know, a crazy black and white edit. And I can save that black and white edit as well by clicking on the plus and saying black and white. And so all snapshots does is allows me to save different versions of my picture edits without having to worry about losing future stuff again. That said, I'm going to go back to import. I'm going to go back to the default. All right, so let's take a look at the part of the program where like the business end. the editing side over here. So the histogram still appears right here. And then the histogram has something added to it, which is really nice of Adobe to have added, which is these two little arrows in each corner of the histogram. And you see when I highlight over them, I get a little, or click on them, I get a little blue warning over here, and I click on this, I get a little red warning up here. And what that's telling me is that this is blown out or gone up to true white. You can see over here on the histogram where it's chunked over. And then same thing here for the blue. That's where I've gone into true black. And so usually what you'd like to do when you're editing, not 100% of the time, is you'll try to bring back all of this. So like you'll bring down highlights or whites or whatever to bring it back in so you've got a full range of tones again. All right, I'm gonna go back to the default. Underneath that is my my targeted editing tools and my crop tool. So my crop tool allows me to crop, fairly straightforward. And then each one of these allows me to edit only part of a picture at a time, while everything down here is going to edit everything all at once, or target, you know, only certain tones in a picture, but it's going to target the whole picture when looking for those tones. I'm going to collapse these down so it's just a little bit easier to look at everything. So first things first is I'm actually going to skip all of these targeted edits, and I'm going to come down to lens corrections right off the bat. And what lens corrections is a way of removing chromatic aberration based on what Adobe knows about your camera and lens combination, and then removing distortion based on that same thing. I pretty much don't know when you would not want to turn on remove chromatic aberration. Enable lens profile, this is up to taste. And you can see that, you know, this is the 16 to 35 Canon. It's got that famous mustache distortion that you can see appear and disappear as we click it on and off. And it vignettes a little bit, the corners get darker. So like, do I like this in the picture or do I not? I think I am going to enable it. What chromatic aberration is an issue with focusing the different color wavelengths of light. And if that's a little bit like Greek to you, don't worry too much about it. And what you can see it as a visualization, and it's a little hard to see in the screencast. If you zoom in on the version you've got, or let's go down to 3.1, see if that gets it big enough. Yeah, so you can see this little bit of purple fringing right here and a little bit of green fringing right there. That's chromatic aberration. And I can just click this on and it will correct most of it for us. Like when Photoshop first came out, having to hand correct it, and it's pretty good in this picture. This isn't bad chromatic aberration. But when you used to have to correct really bad chromatic aberration, you were a very unhappy person. Like many photographers cried when they got it as a button click because it's just so nice. And the reason why I do this right off the bat is because it's going to change how you edit the rest of the picture about whether or not you have it, you know, with the darker corners or not. That's going to change how you do the rest of this. All right, so then I'm going to come up to crop, and as you can tell, my picture is crooked. So the very first thing I'm going to do is fix just how crooked my picture is. And so there's a bubble level right here labeled the angle tool. And just as you would think like a bubble level would work is I can draw a straight line with it. So I'll click on this horizon line right over here, and I'll drag straight over to here. And then when I release, it will straighten the picture based on that line. It will rotate the picture until the line that I drew would be parallel to the bottom of the frame, which is very useful for correcting that distortion. And then I can always move my crop around a little bit by clicking and dragging on it. So I'm going to click and drag to the left because I think that looks a little bit better. A couple other things to know about crop that we're not going to get into. This lock will keep it in the original aspect ratio. So if I wanted to go into like a square aspect ratio or something else like that, I would need to unlock it. And then where it says original, I can pick other known or common aspect ratios. Like if I was going to put this in a 5:7 frame or an 8:10 or a 16:20 frame, I'd pick one of these other ones and it would change my crop overlay like so to fit one of those frames rather than me having to like eyeball it or do it after the fact. And then I'm gonna hit escape, so not to accept that. And that's pretty much it for crop. So I'm gonna click close. The next one, we're gonna use this tool quite a bit in the next picture, so I'm gonna skip it for now, but it's a way of removing elements from a picture. Red eye tool also works on dogs. It's pretty straightforward. You paint over wherever there's red eye and it removes it like magic. The one I do wanna use on this picture is the GND tool. More on it in a second. This radial filter will be exactly like the GND tool, except it will be circular oval. And then the paintbrush allows me to paint in a certain area and edit just that, which we'll do at the end for this picture to make that rainbow right there pop a little bit. So I'm going to click on the GND tool. And again, if you're familiar with a lot of photography tools, this is a graduated neutral density filter from, old school film days. And so what it does is you can think of it as like sunglasses or like that blue stripe at the top of a windshield, where it just kind of darkens the sun so you're not as blinded by it, and then has that soft edge. So that's the same thing for this. So anywhere I click and drag will be a soft line, and then on one side of it up here will be full effect, and then down here will be no effect. And then you can see kind of like how that works visually like so. So you can see 50% effect, 100% effect, 0 effect. And this is really useful in landscape photography to correct how much brighter a sky is. So I'm going to delete this particular one because I want to change it. And what I want to do for this picture is I'm going to click right about here at the top. And then as I click, notice how kind of wiggly waggly this is. If I hold down the shift key, it will snap it into different directions for me. So if I want this to be perfectly parallel to that horizon I just straightened, I can hold down shift and it will do that for me. I'm going to drag it down to just past the horizon like so. So full effect would be up here at the top where there's not that much of it, and then no effect down here. And this will allow me to correct this very bright area of the sky very easily, and then softly kind of hide that I'm doing that correction throughout the rest of this. So I'm going to drop my exposure down on this by, I don't know, about 1.5. And if you're familiar with photographic stops, 1 3/4 photographic stops. I can use any of these other ones in the same idea, and we'll go over these sliders in the basics tab, so we won't hop into it in the GND. So again, all I did was just darken that top area, and it kind of corrects how much brighter that is. Now let's say I ever want to come back and change it or delete it. I'll just click back into the GND tool. A little circle will appear where I had it located. If I mouse over it, it shows me what it's affecting. And then if I click onto it, I have my controls back, and I can just hit delete on my keyboard to remove it. And that will be true for any of these other tools over here, not the crop tool though. I can always click onto one of those gray circles and hit delete if I want to remove it. So let's expand open the basics tab. So basics tab, I can choose between color and black and white. I can choose how it's being brought into, how it's understanding the raw data based on one of these presets. So like if I go to Adobe Landscape, it'll make it a little bit punchier. So I think I'm going to go into Adobe Landscape. Excuse me. Color balance and temperature, exactly what it sounds like. I can make it bluer or yellower. I can make it greener or more magenta. I am going to make it a little bit warmer just because I like warm pictures. I don't know, maybe about 5,700. And then whenever you move one, it's generally good to move the other. So I'm going to bump that one up to 17 from 15. So if you move one to the right, move the other one to the right. And if you move one to the left, move the other one to the left. Generally, you won't move them in opposite directions. And occasionally you'll do just one. But if you move one, usually move the other. If you're feeling lazy, you can click the auto button and it will try to automatically do it for you. Kind of moody, don't really like it. And then tone is what we're working with right now. So like you can auto it if you want. Didn't look great in this case. Exposure, notice how when we mouse over these different tools, different areas get moused over on our histogram and then vice versa. That tells me what tones this slider will be biased towards. And looking at my histogram, I see that I don't have any true white tones anymore after I made that GND. And I'd like to have a full range of tones. So I'm going to come down to white. I'm going to drag this over until I have my full range of tones again. And I know I've gone too far now because I'm starting to get little red splotches right here telling me I've gone into true white. So maybe we'll do, I don't know, plus 70 or so. Yeah, just a hint of white. That looks pretty good. And then why don't we bring down the highlights as well, stretch that down a little bit. Bringing down highlights kind of gives the illusion of saturation without actually having to use the vibrance or saturation tool. So again, each one of these will target a different part of the histogram. You mouse over it and it will tell you. Presence is kind of like faux sharpness and texture. So like this texture is very nice for like if you want to kind of add texture to skin or other areas that are smoothed out, or if you want to smooth out skin and vice versa. I don't use it pretty much ever in landscapes. Clarity is a form of sharpening. We'll get to other sharpening in a minute. Why don't we go ahead and bump the clarity by, I don't know, 15 or so, just to kind of make it a little punchier. Dehaze is an astonishingly effective tool for removing fog, although generally, I don't know why you'd be removing fog. Fog looks pretty cool. But it doesn't do a very good job of adding fog. Like that just doesn't, this looks washed out, doesn't look foggy. But it is very good at removing fog. Some people like to use it to kind of add moodiness to it by trying to remove that fog. Not really my bag. Vibrance is adding the appearance of more color or removing color without kind of chunking out your colors. So like it tries to keep detail and relative color making sense while making it a little punchier. While saturation is exactly what it sounds like. It's just adds saturation. You can see the difference, like we start getting chunked in greens and blues and it doesn't look as natural. For either one of these, I wouldn't ever go more than plus or minus 15 or 20 or so. Anything past that starts looking cartoonish, unless you're going for a black and white look. Excuse me. That said, if you're going for black and white, it's best to click up here so you get the controls for black and white. Why don't we go ahead and bump the vibrance by 10, just make it a little more vibrant. I'm going to close the basic tab by clicking on the little triangle. Next is the tonal curve, which I'm not going to jump into. It's fairly similar to the basics tab, but it's laid out in a way that people that are familiar with the curve tool in Photoshop will appreciate and probably use. But if you're not used to that tool in Photoshop, I don't see a huge reason to use this over the basic slider. HSL and color. So this allows you to target individual colors and edit them based on what color they are, how saturated they are, and how bright they are. So I'm going to click on all so I just have everything in one section so it's easier for me. And I'm going to make these bean leaves down here, I think they're beans, a little bit greener. So I'm going to grab, let's try the green slider and see if that's it. Yeah. I'm going to grab the green slider and bring it over by, I don't know, 12 or so. And you can see how that removes some of that red tone from those beans, making them look a little bit more natural. Same thing if I wanted to, I could, desaturate the beans, but, that looks goofy. Or if I could make them brighter or darker as well using the luminance slider. So very powerful way to target just individual colors. This is where, like, when people get good with it, can start doing very interesting editing in just Lightroom versus Photoshop. Split toning, so this allows you to target a color edit for either your highlights or your shadows. So let's say I was really into that Instagram look. Well, if I was into that Instagram look, I'd brighten it up so I didn't have any true black tones in there. And then I'd come down to the split toning thing and I would click this box and, I don't know, grab the yellow one. And then I'd click the shadows box and click the blue one. And I get that kind of classic Instagram look, and I can shift the balance around to say where I want more or less of that kind of effect. Not something I'm a fan of, but like if you're in that Instagram crowd, this can be a really useful way of making it quickly without having to, reapply it in Instagram. So I'm clicking back down here to my green luminance shift to get rid of those split toning edits. That said, I could also click this box right here to disable this box's edits. So it's a little check mark box right there. So I can click that off if I don't want to actually enable any of those split toning. So either one is a good option. Detail, we'll get into a little bit more on the third picture. This is where you'll do your noise reduction and sharpening if you're not going to do it in another program later like Topaz or Photoshop. Lens correction we already talked about. By the way, there is a manual version of it in here where if you want to manually try to do it, it's there for you to try. If you've got a really old camera lens or manual camera lenses without any electrical contacts, this is where you'll have to kind of eyeball it. Or, see if somebody has a profile made for you, which would be really nice. Transform we'll get to in a little bit. on another picture. Effects is a way of adding vignetting after the fact. So like generally, you know, drag this up, drag that down. You can change, you know, where the midpoint is located at, the roundness of it, and then the softness of that effect. Grain is exactly what it sounds like. If I wanted to add fake noise to my picture, this is where I would add that fake noise. Not a fan, so I'm just gonna turn that off. Oops, there we go. And then close effects. Calibration is how the raw data is getting processed, and chances are you will never mess with this. You can if you want to, but it's just kind of how the raw data gets processed, and I would not hop into it unless you need to. So that is how you edit a picture. In Lightroom, let's look at some more targeted edit. Ooh, I almost forgot something. Why don't we actually do this rainbow real quick? So I'm going to grab this brush tool, and the brush tool will now give me all of those sliders I just had over in the basics tab. So let's zero that out, and I'm going to, you know, be silly and do like saturation 100 just so it's easier to see. And then my mouse is going to appear huge compared to the painting I'm about to apply to this, and that's because I have a giant mouse enabled, so it's easier for you guys to see where it is. So this allows me to paint in an area, and it will apply that edit to that area. So you can see now there's the colors right there are way punchier. There's a couple of things that they've added to this tool that makes it even more useful. So we had size, which you can control by scrolling, feather, which is how soft the edge is. So if I had it 0 feathering, it will make a kind of comical perfect circle. Versus if I do full feathering, I get a very soft edge circle. And then down here, I have flow, which is the rate that it's applied. Generally, you can just leave this one alone. That's fine. And then auto mask will try to find edges of stuff for you and then not have it hit that one area. So let's say I drop my feathering down to 15 or so and I go over this horizon line. Notice how it's only doing the sky and not the grass as well. So that's what auto mask does. Very, very useful. And again, just like with the GND tool, if I mouse over, if I click off of this and then mouse over that gray blob, it'll show me where my edits are. And then I can always click back onto it to further adjust it. So like I can make it darker if I wanted to. And then I can always hit the delete key to fully remove it. Fun stuff with the brush. So let's look at a couple other examples and some other tools. So here we have a nice bride picture. And you can see how we've got some blown out stuff on the jewelry. That's fine. So I'm going to turn off that warning so I don't have to pay attention to it. So this picture already looks 95% good. So there's a couple of things that I'd want to change about it though before I would send it to a client. So first, just like with everything else, I'm going to come down to lens corrections and I'll turn on chromatic aberration removal. There isn't probably any chromabs in this with how this was taken, but you know, why not? And then I'll turn on enable profile correction. A little bit of vignetting correction. I'm going to leave it off in this case. I'll come up to basics, and then here's one that we didn't talk about on the last tool. So if my white balance is supposed to actually make something appear white, like her dress, I can use this eyedropper and I can click on it and say, I want this white. And it will do slight adjustments to the picture to make it actually neutral white. So let's say we had kind of a yellow cast to it. This is supposed to be neutral, click on it, it's fixed. Or let's say I want this gray background to be perfectly neutral. I can click on that to do the same thing. It'll make this perfectly gray. Very, very, very useful tool, especially if you're using one of those gray cards that are also popular. Let's take a quick peekaboo at this tool. It kind of looks like the dude symbol almost, you know, circle with an arrow pointing. This is my clone and my heal tool. So I'm not going to use the clone, but what clone does is it's literally copy paste. You click on something and say, I want to copy this, and I want to copy it to here. What heal does is I'm going to click on something and I'm going to say, I want this gone, and it will jump off to the side and say, is this what you want to put there instead? And then blend the edge together. So let's say I zoom in on this bride. And you know, this mole right here just is not doing it for me. I'm going to click on the mole, and like magic, it's gone. It's like terrifying almost. Or let's say I scroll up I have to hit the space. When you have this tool active, you can't click and drag on the screen anymore. You have to hold down the space bar to click and drag. She's got what looks like an earring hole right there. Yeah, not so much. That can also go away. You know, this little dimple can go away. That can go away. That can go away. That can go away. This little makeup splotch can go away. And you can take it as far as you want. Now, there is a lot of limitation to this. So let's say for whatever reason, there was something on her shoulder here that I didn't like. Or let's say I didn't like this necklace. If I just try to remove the necklace, it has a problem right here. And this is the limitation of this tool. That said, it is creepy powerful. So let's say whatever I was removing, you know, it wouldn't make sense. Let's say I want to remove her eye. And like, if I make this a big enough circle to encompass her eye, I go up into her eyebrow. So instead, I'll make it about the height of her eye, and then I can click and drag and paint over her eyeball. Let's get a little bit more up into there. There we go. And then when I release, it will jump down to here, which, you know, isn't the best place to be copying from. So I'm going to click on this circle and drag it up over her forehead and release, and kind of absolutely terrifying. You know, there's her eyeball gone. So it can be very powerful, but you have to sometimes tell it where it's best to copy from. Let's hop into the third picture. Boink. So here's a nice landscape. You can see that we're at 5,000 ISO. So when we zoom in on it, and let's zoom in pretty far. I'm going to do 3:1. And we go down here, you can see a lot of noise. So this noise in this case, because we're not seeing like a lot of magenta or green in it, is what we call luminance noise. So let's look at how we can remove this noise. I'm going to go back down to 1:1. It's a little bit more reasonable. And I'm going to come down to detail. So in detail, I have noise reduction. So if I saw a lot of that color in here, I would move the color slider. In this case, this is luminance noise. So I'm just going to drag this slider over. And as I go, you're going to notice that that grainy appearance goes away, but at the cost of detail. Notice how much kind of blurrier everything's getting, because it's averaging out those pixels to try to remove that texture. But if I wanted to, I can try to drag back up this detail slider to bring some of that back, but it's never quite perfect. It doesn't ever go quite perfectly when I'm moving those in. And then same thing with contrast, that can also help bring in some of that edge detail back. So it's never going to look perfect, but it's not bad. And if you're not printing or exporting at full resolution, or if you're doing this on the web, this is a great option. These two pictures I've included mostly for you guys to play around with kind of philosophically. And if you look at them, this second one is a JPEG and this one is a RAW file. Oops, I have it backwards. This one's the JPEG, this one's the RAW file. After the class, what I would do is I would play with these two pictures, and it will kind of really drive home the difference between editing in RAW and the difference in editing in JPEG. If you can shoot in RAW, and just about all cameras these days are capable of shooting in RAW, including your phone. So like on my iPhone 7, I have the Lightroom app set up for it to capture RAW file formats, so I can have access to RAW in my editing programs. And it means I can make way more drastic edits before issues start appearing in the picture from my editing. JPEGs, you can't push very far before we start getting real issues. Let's hop into the sixth image. So this is the Polgus Water Temple in California, south of San Francisco. Pretty rad. I really like the place. Lots and lots of weddings get photographed here, as you would imagine, based on what this place looks like. That said, when I took this picture, there is some issues with the way I took it. Just kind of did it pretty quickly. And one of them is that one, the picture isn't straight, and then it's keystoned a little bit. I'm pointing up at the building, so the top of the building is narrower than the bottom of the building. Because I didn't have anything like a tilt shift lens and I wasn't paying that much attention, I want that happen. So I can correct it now in Lightroom, and because it's slight, I'll get away with that correction. So I'm going to close my detail tab, and I'm going to come down to lens corrections first. I'm going to turn on remove chromatic aberration and enable lens profile, which, spoiler, the 40mm pancake has a lot of vignetting, as you can see. And then I'm going to drop down to transform. So if you can't afford a tilt shift lens, transform is your next best friend. And how it works is I can draw a series of up to 4 lines, and what it'll do is it will try to make those 4 lines square to each other. So the first one I'm going to draw is I'm going to go across the bottom, I'm going to go across, this top lip of the pool to make that, say I want that straight. So I'm going to click across the top of that, and this will do, once I do the other lines, the same thing as that leveling tool that we used did. And notice I get like a little window showing me where my cursor's at. And the more exact I can be about this, the better. Then I'm going to do the same thing to these pillars. Now, unfortunately, the pillars aren't the best thing in the world to do this off of, because if you look, they actually taper slightly at the top. So I'm actually going to go just off to the side when I get to the top. But I'm going to go right here to the side of that fluting on this column. If I was better at my art history, I could tell you what type of column this was, but I'm not. And I'm going to go just off to the side of it, maybe a little bit closer. There we go. You can already see it starting to straighten that picture. So it looked at this intersection point and it was like, how do I make all 4 of these areas a 90-degree spacing? And then I'm going to do the same thing to this pillar right here. I'm going to drag up, come to just the outside, right about there. And just like magic, I'm going to drop the tool back in there. It has it straightened out. So let's turn this on and off so you can see the effect of it. And like, that's just absolutely terrifying. Let's go into the crop tool. Let's clean the crop up a little bit. So why don't let's come in from the top. Giant mouse makes this harder, of course. Get this good and centered. And you can change your crop overlay. Oh, it's in a weird spot. Loop overlay. Cycle through loop view. Nope. It's in here somewhere. There's a way that you can flip through the different crop overlays. Goodness knows if I can remember it offhand, because I like this one. It's the only one I ever use. Anyway, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit more. Yep. Now I have a fairly attractive looking picture. I got some junk in there though, so I'll grab the healing tool and I'll be like, no, like that's not the best spot to clone from. Why don't we clone from over here, buddy? And it's like, okay. Or like this drain right there. Yeah, drain, you are not doing it for me, so why don't you go away as well? Oh, you did not a good job of removing that. So why don't we actually clone from over here, Lightroom? And streaming this is making Lightroom a little jittery too, so it's hard to line this stuff up. Or, like that can also go away. I did a pretty good time choosing it that time, didn't you, Lightroom? Same thing. I'd want to move this one a little bit, but for now this will be good. Or like there's that kind of fence post right there that doesn't look so hot. That barbed wire fence post doesn't look so hot. And then if I was really masochistic, I would go in and try to remove those cables. All right, 1-to-1. Fit. There we go. And then I'd go through and edit this normally. So for like we've got a couple of minutes. So how I would edit this one normally is I'd go into basics, bring the exposure down a little bit, bring the whites up a little bit, and probably pump the contrast up just a hair, open up the shadows a little bit, bring back down the blacks, and warm it up. And we're already starting to get kind of a nice moodier picture. And then why don't we actually work with those blues? Because this blue is a little cyan for my taste. Is it the aquas? Yeah. So why don't we actually, oops, that's saturation. Excuse me. Why don't we make those bluer? And we'll zoom out to a third size just so you can kind of get a nice look at that. So, we go to this from, excuse me while I move some zoom windows around so I can get back to my history. So, we go start here and we get all the way to here. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes set aside right now for questions. Does anyone have any questions or want to know how to do anything in particular that wasn't covered today? And you'll need to type your questions, by the way. Only Ruth and I can talk just to kind of keep the chat a little bit more simple. Oh, I forgot to show you guys how to export. My mistake. While you guys type up some questions, let's go over exporting real quick. So to get files back out of this, I'm going to click on library. Ooh, I was just like, why did I have 10 extra minutes? You'll click on a picture that you want to export, or you can hold down Shift to get many pictures, or you can hold down the command on Apple or Control on Windows and toggle selections on and off. So let's say I wanted to get this landscape out and the Pulgus water temple out. So I'll have both of them selected, and then I will click on export. And again, I went back into library to get this export button. Export will also exist up here in the file menu, or Command Shift E or Command E is the hotkey for it. Yeah, Command Shift E is the hotkey to also export. So I'll click on export, and it will give me a window that looks like this. And you can see that it's got a bunch of my presets in it from my other catalog. And it will preset this right side over here. So like if there's something that you find yourself doing quite a bit, set it all up and then click add to make a preset that you can use. So the first thing that you will find in here, I'm gonna collapse all these down so it's easy to look at, is export to. So if you want it to your hard drive, pick hard drive. Then you'll say where you want it to go. So if you're making a preset, the thing I find the most useful is choose folder later. So when you hit export, it'll ask you where you want to put it. And again, it's really useful if you're trying to do one button click over here. File naming. So if you want to rename your file, date file name is always a great idea because it makes it very easy to find it later if all of your folders are organized by date. But you can also put in custom names and sequences for if you're shooting a wedding and you want to hide that you took 1,200 pictures and you're sending them 200. And you don't want them to be like, hey, I see like this picture. What does the one right next to it look like? And you're like, well, that's the one that was out of focus, so I'm not sending that to you. So you can make a custom file name where you put in a custom name for it. And then you can also do custom name sequence, and you can put the start number right here. So like if you do 50 of them, you can come back and then put the start number at 51. I like date file name. Video, believe it or not, this program does a little bit of video. If you're masochistic, go ahead and bring videos into Lightroom and give it a go. Doesn't work very well. File settings, this is the important one. So you're converting, hopefully, a RAW file into a regular file format, or you have a JPEG and you need to bring back out a JPEG. In file format, you've got a couple of options. If you are sharing it to customers or on the web, you will use JPEG. If you're bringing it into Photoshop, you can use PSD if you want. TIFF is really great for sending to high-end printers. So let's say you're going down to like Hamilton Color Lab in town to get a nice print made. TIFF is great for that because it's 16-bit versus JPEG's 8-bit. If I'm speaking Greek right now, it's probably not a problem for you yet. PNG, some people on the internet will kind of erroneously tell you to use PNG for sharing on the internet. They're wrong. PNG is really great for certain types of web assets, and then for stuff that absolutely has to have more color data. But for it's not well supported. The color stuff isn't well supported on the internet, and people's screens honestly often can't even display it either. But it does support transparency, which is why a lot of graphic designers will use it for things like icons and website assets. DNG exports it as a RAW file, so your edits won't be applied to it, sad times. And then original is whatever it was in. So again, JPEG for sharing on the web. For some reason, Adobe's like, you should have 60% quality JPEGs, just turn it up to 100. And then color space, if you're sharing on the web, put it in sRGB. If you're going to be sending it off to a printer, do Adobe RGB. And if you are going to be editing it in Photoshop and you really know what you're doing, ProPhoto RGB. What each one of these does and what the difference between them are could be like a whole semester-long class. So that's like the quick rundown. sRGB for web, Adobe RGB for printing, ProPhoto RGB if you really, really know what you're doing. And then if you want to limit your file size for something like a submission type or whatever, you can do it right here. I don't ever use it. Image sizing. So this is where you can tell it to resize your image. You can do, like, you can manually enter in what you want it as. You can do dimensions. I usually do long edge. And that way, if I'm exporting multiple images, so if I was exporting this landscape and this portrait one, it would make the longest edge the same length. Since I'm exporting to the web, 900 to 1200 is perfect for exporting to the web. Resolution on the web doesn't really matter anymore. That 72 is left over from the very, very early days. So don't worry too much about that. And if you're going to be printing it, you'll turn off you'll turn off image sizing and just send it out. And the guy hopefully will be, wherever you're sending it out to print will be able to resize it for you. But for web, either 900 or 1200 is a great option. Output sharpening, lower standard, and then for screen. Otherwise, I wouldn't mess with sharpening in Lightroom. And that said, I usually turn it off. Metadata, this one's important, especially if you're working with phone pictures. Remove location information, leave in person information. So this way, I have my information and they're saying who took it, but I also don't want them to have my GPS address where I took the picture. Pretty simple. And then you can also come up here and say copyright only, and they will only, put in whatever I have entered into that copyright section over here. So copyright Regan D. Pufal or whatever. Up to you. I usually like to do all metadata and then remove my location information. You can also throw in your Lightroom keywords if you want that to be searchable by other people. Then you'll click export. And since I had choose later, it's asking me where I want to put it. All right, so 3 minutes left. Any questions in those last 3 minutes? You're welcome to play around with these files, by the way, after we're done here today. The only one that isn't mine is this bride picture, and this bride picture is a public domain one that I found. And that's just because when I shoot people, I normally don't bother to get model releases because I'm doing it for fine art, or they're paying me to photograph them. So I'm not going to sell their picture somewhere else. So I didn't have any good example ones laying around with a model release handy. So I had to find one on the internet. The rest of these ones are all mine. That's my puppy, Lee, who you probably can hear drinking water right now. All right. If there aren't any questions, I guess that will be it. You're welcome. Thanks for attending.
Thank you for everyone for coming. We're going to go ahead and end our stream. Continue to look at our calendar for more programs coming up. Thank you. Bye-bye.